Have you ever walked into a room and felt someone's presence before they even said a word? No grand gestures, no loud entrances, just presence, the kind that cuts through every conversation, every ego, every look seeking attention, and without ever asking for it. They own the room. That's not charisma. That's not dominance. That is power, silent, measured, unshakable, and in a world addicted to noise, it's the rarest form of strength you'll ever witness. We live in an era where volume is mistaken for confidence, where the loudest voice in the room often drowns out the wisest. But true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't chase validation. It waits, it watches, and when the time comes, it speaks once, and only once, because that's all it takes. You see, silence isn't the absence of power, it's the control of it. Most people think being quiet means being weak, passive, or afraid to confront, but what if I told you silence? True silence is the result of total control. It's the discipline to hold back when the ego screams to be heard. It's the clarity to let others fall over their own words while you calculate your next move. It's choosing not to play every game you're invited to, and winning precisely because of it. This isn't theory. The Stoics knew this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." That's not silence out of cowardice. It's silence rooted in strength. Epictetus taught that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And reaction, in the realm of the wise, is never impulsive. It's delayed, it's deliberate, it's devastatingly effective. I've watched people destroy their reputations by overreacting, by needing the last word, by proving they're right, but the one who watches, who listens, who lets the noise pass before they act, that's the one everyone fears. Not because they're dangerous in the moment, but because you never see them coming. You can't predict them, and that's what makes them powerful. Silence isn't emptiness, it's strategy, it's power under pressure, it's the quiet storm gathering force while others waste their strength on spectacle. And in that stillness lies a kind of terrifying authority, the kind that doesn't need permission to lead. It just does. So, the next time you enter a room, ask yourself, are you performing, or are you commanding? The difference isn't in how much you say, it's in how little you need to. Silence is not the absence of thought, it's the concentration of it. It's not a void, but a presence so heavy it alters the air. Stillness, when used with purpose, is a pressure point. It holds its own gravity. And when someone leans in expecting sound, expecting reaction, and receives nothing but composure, that silence speaks louder than any outburst ever could. We often misunderstand quiet as a lack of something, as if you've got nothing to say, nothing to fight with, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Stillness, true stillness, is strategy. It's not the retreat of the weak. It's the posture of someone choosing when, and to strike. Machiavelli once wrote that a ruler should never reveal the entirety of his mind. Never show all his cards. Why? Because unpredictability is power. and silence makes you unreadable. When you don't react, people project. They fill the space with their own fear, doubt, or guilt. They try to guess what you're thinking, what you'll do next, and that guessing consumes them. It turns their certainty into anxiety, their bravado into insecurity, because when you stay silent, they are left fighting ghosts in their own heads. I've seen this unfold in real time. I remember standing in a heated meeting, a room thick with tension. Someone came at me hard, insults wrapped in clever phrasing, an obvious play to provoke. The old version of me would have snapped back, matched heat with heat, tried to win the argument. But instead, I let him finish. I looked him dead in the eyes and said nothing. Not out of fear, out of control, out of calculation. The silence that followed, it was brutal. It wasn't weak, it was devastating. He kept talking. He unraveled. The room shifted. The power dynamic flipped. And I never raised my voice. That moment taught me something. Silence can disarm more effectively than any defense. It's not that you don't have words. It's that you've mastered the timing. You've trained the ego to wait. Because sometimes the most strategic move is no move at all. It allows others to reveal their intentions, their insecurities, their impatience, and in that space, you gather information, you maintain control, you conserve your force. This is what the Stoics understood so well. Restraint isn't repression, it's readiness, it's clarity in the chaos. We live in a world that rewards speed, noise, reaction, but those who dominate over time are those who remain still in the storm, whose silence is not an absence, but a signal that they are thinking, watching, waiting, and when they finally act, the move is clean, precise, and irreversible, because while others are busy being loud, the silent ones are writing the ending. In this world, perception is power, not truth, not intention, just the story people write about you in their own minds. You can be brilliant, ethical, skilled, but if you come across as weak, unsure, or chaotic, that's what the world believes. That's the image they act on. And in that illusion, power is gained or lost. People don't follow truth. They follow asterisk certainty. They follow calm. That's why, in any high-stakes environment, whether a boardroom or a battlefield, it's not the loudest voice that leads. It's the one that doesn't flinch. When everyone else spirals, the still figure becomes the fixed point. And that stillness, it rewrites perception faster than any explanation ever could. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They knew that your external doesn't matter as much as how you carry it. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but his true strength was internal. The more chaotic the empire became, the quieter his response. That calm presence made people question their panic. It made them doubt their own outrage. When you remain composed in chaos, you don't just preserve your own clarity, you distort theirs. Suddenly, they're not sure if there's even a threat at all. Stillness bends perception like gravity, and perception bends outcomes. I once watched this play out in a brutal business negotiation. Two executives at war across the table, contracts, money, egos. One of them slammed his hand down, voice rising with every sentence. You could smell the desperation through the cologne. The other, silent, poised, he kept his breathing measured, his words slow and deliberate. He didn't interrupt, he didn't argue, and that restraint, that surgical calm, made the room shift. The angry executive started doubting himself. The aggression began to sound hollow. Minutes later, the deal flipped completely, not because the calm man said more, but because he said less better. His composure became the anchor in the storm, and in doing so, he became the center of gravity. That moment didn't belong to the loud, it belonged to the still. I've experienced this personally, too. There was a time I was falsely accused of something in front of a crowd, voices rising, judgment pouring in like rain. Everything in me wanted to defend, to explain, to fight back, but instead, I stood tall. I kept my eyes steady and my words minimal. I chose stillness over scramble, and the crowd, it started to hesitate. The more I remained unshaken, the more they questioned the noise itself. In the end, I didn't have to prove anything. The truth didn't win that moment, perception did, and my control over it came from silence, not from resistance. So remember this: you don't control the world's truth. You control how the world perceives your position inside it. And when you hold your ground while others rush to explain, that perception becomes your silent, unstoppable weapon. You don't need to take the king. You control the board until there's nowhere left to run. That's how real power operates, not through force, but through structure, through invisible influence. When you shape the environment, when you dictate the pace, the space, the rhythm, you've already won. The illusion is that the most aggressive player dominates. But in chess, it's the one who sees 5 moves ahead and controls where the opponent is allowed to go. You don't need to rush. You don't need to shout. You simply remove every path until checkmate feels like destiny. That's the Stoic way, not controlling people, but controlling what they walk into. You don't tell them how to think. You control what they're reacting to. That's what Marcus Aurelius did. He didn't try to change everyone's mind. He mastered his own mind so deeply that the world had to move around him. Epictetus taught that while we can't control external forces, we can control our response, our timing, our ground, and in doing so, we shape the field, sometimes without anyone even realizing it's happening. I've used this in my own life more times than I can count. Once in a critical negotiation, I noticed the other party trying to speed things up, forcing a timeline that would corner me into making a quick decision. Instead of pushing back with arguments, I controlled the frame. I delayed the meeting. I made myself less available. I shifted the context. When we finally sat down, they were the ones who felt rushed. They were the ones off balance. I didn't confront them directly. I just adjusted the terrain beneath their feet. That subtle shift flipped the power dynamic completely. And it's not just business. This applies to everything, especially relationships. When you control your own tempo, your own energy, you stop being reactive, you become the axis. Whether it's a conversation with someone trying to push your buttons or a romantic interaction where someone's testing your patience, you gain the upper hand not by attacking, but by staying centered. You choose when to respond. You choose when to withdraw. And your silence, your delay, your pacing, it drives them to reveal more than they intended. We underestimate how powerful it is to simply not play. When someone expects you to chase and you don't. When they expect you to defend and you remain calm. When they expect you to escalate and you redirect. That's not weakness. That's shaping the battlefield. And eventually, they're no longer playing their game. They're playing yours. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just rearranges the room until there's only one seat left, and you're already sitting in it. That's how you win without attacking. That's how you dominate without noise. Shape the field, and the pieces fall into place on their own. There is a certain power in being underestimated, in letting them think they've already won, in allowing the room to believe you're harmless, soft-spoken, naive, because when they see no threat, they lower their guard, they speak too freely, they reveal too much, and that's when you strike, not with force, but with precision. See, this is not about playing small. It's about playing smart. When you don't broadcast your strength, you allow others to reveal their weakness. That's the trap. That's the strategy. Machiavelli once said a ruler must be both lion and fox, fierce when necessary, cunning always. But when you move through the world as only a lion, you invite resistance. The real masters cloak the lion in sheep's wool and smile while the battlefield arranges itself in their favor. I've used this countless times. Early in my career, I walked into meetings where people thought I was just another face, too young, too quiet, too agreeable. They dismissed me before I ever opened my mouth, and I let them. Because while they were talking themselves in circles, posturing, trying to dominate the space, I was studying the patterns. I was already 5 steps ahead, and when I finally spoke, it wasn't to argue, it was to end the conversation, not through volume, but through precision. And in that silence before they could respond, the shift was seismic. They realized they had underestimated someone who never needed to brag. That's when control changes hands. When surprise is no longer a tactic, but a weapon. The Stoics understood this well. Restraint isn't hesitation, it's calculation. You don't react because you're not playing their game. You've already designed your own. Every moment of being overlooked, ignored, dismissed, that's fuel, that's positioning. Because the wolf in sheep's clothing doesn't need to growl to remind others it has teeth. It waits, it watches, and when the moment is right, it doesn't ask for space, it takes it. Without apology, without noise. We've been taught to prove ourselves, to demand respect, but I've learned that real power never demands, it chooses. It chooses how to appear, how to pace, how to let others believe they're in control right until the ground shifts. That's psychological warfare, that's elegance in battle. The greatest advantage isn't always strength, it's surprise. And the ones who master the art of being underestimated never need to shout to be feared. Because by the time you realize they were never weak, they've already won. There comes a moment when silence must give way to action, not chaos. Not fury, but cold, clean finality. This isn't about drama, it's about decisiveness, because half measures don't resolve anything. They linger, they rot, they leave doors open for ghosts to return, dragging with them confusion, resentment, unfinished wars. I've learned, sometimes painfully, that real peace doesn't come from being nice. It comes from being clear, and clarity demands endings, not emotional flares or dramatic exits, but sharp, surgical closure. You don't cauterize a wound with hesitation. You cut once, precisely, then you move on. The Stoics understood this truth better than anyone. Virtue wasn't just about kindness, it was about judgment. Mercy without boundaries becomes negligence. Compassion without action becomes complicity. When someone or something continually violates your peace, it's not noble to allow it, it's weak. I used to think walking away without saying everything was strength, but now I know. True strength is saying what must be said, doing what must be done, and ending what no longer belongs in your life. Not because you're heartless, but because you've chosen peace over performance. Don't leave open doors for ghosts to return. That line has haunted me. I've lived it. I've reopened doors that should have stayed sealed. Gave second chances out of guilt, not wisdom, and every time, I paid the price. More conflict, more pain, the same cycles dressed in different excuses. I learned that not every ending needs an explanation. Some things end not because you stopped caring, but because they stopped serving. And when you finally accept that, the decision becomes easy. The heartbreak isn't in letting go. It's in dragging something broken just to delay the inevitable. This isn't about punishment, it's about prevention. You don't finish something because you want revenge. You finish it because you respect yourself enough not to let chaos become a tenant in your life. You don't need a dramatic speech. You don't need a final confrontation that goes viral in your head. You need clarity, quiet, firm, unmoving clarity, the kind that says, I've seen enough, I've felt enough, and I choose peace. I've been in rooms where the loudest voice begged for attention, for reaction, for one more chance to stir the pot. But when you walk away, not in weakness, but in certainty, you become untouchable. Finality isn't cruelty, it's the absence of ego, the rejection of drama, the end of the loop. When you cut the thread, you stop the bleeding. When you close the door, you reclaim the room, and in that stillness, there is power. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that never has to again. Fear doesn't come from outside, it rises from within. No one can inject it into you, but they can awaken it. With a glance, with silence, with the space to let your own demons surface. That's what most people never understand about power. It's not about dominating others, it's about making them confront what they've been running from. And nothing brings that out faster than stillness. When you say nothing, you force the other person to listen to themselves. And often, that's the loudest, scariest sound in the world. That's the mirror. That's the strategy. I've seen it in action. A manager I once worked under, he barely spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He never repeated himself. But his presence alone changed the atmosphere of every room he entered. When someone messed up, he wouldn't scold them. He would look at them. Just one long, unreadable look, and say nothing. The silence did more damage than 100 angry lectures ever could. Because in that silence, people saw themselves, their guilt, their overcompensation, their fragility. They unraveled, not because he imposed pressure, but because he let their own mind do the damage. That's psychological mastery. Ambiguity, when used deliberately, becomes a form of control. You don't have to accuse. You don't have to attack. You just become unreadable, unpredictable, and that uncertainty fills the silence with stories. Fear grows in the gaps. People start wondering what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you know that they don't. And the truth is, you don't have to know anything. You just have to let them believe you do. That's the genius of restraint. There was a moment in my own life where I learned this the hard way. Someone betrayed me, not in a dramatic, theatrical way, but in a quiet, backdoor kind of move. I had every opportunity to confront them, to blast them publicly, to make noise, but I didn't. I pulled back, said nothing, removed myself entirely, and in the weeks that followed, they broke, not because I threatened them, but because I didn't. Because the silence made them project every possible consequence, and the ambiguity became unbearable. They exposed themselves out of fear that I might one day speak. Power is what you allow others to see in themselves. In your absence, that quote stuck with me. Real dominance isn't about standing over someone. It's about standing away and letting the void reflect what they truly are. That's what the Stoics taught, that you don't need to scream to shake a foundation. Sometimes all you have to do is leave the mirror standing and walk away, because the greatest power is making someone face themselves and never needing to explain how. Patience isn't passive, it's pressure, perfectly measured. We live in a world addicted to speed, everyone rushing to reply, to prove, to win. But speed is often just fear in disguise. The insecure can't wait. They need validation now, results now, answers now. And that's exactly why patience has become a rare and terrifying superpower. Because when you wait, calmly, deliberately, you make the others reveal themselves. You don't have to attack. You simply let time do the work. And the most brilliant part, they destroy themselves long before you ever lift a finger. Patience is not weakness, it's positioning. You're not idle, you're watching, listening, calculating. You're sharpening while they're swinging wildly. And every second you remain unmoved, their uncertainty grows. What is he waiting for? Why hasn't she reacted? The silence turns into suspense. Suspense becomes paranoia, and paranoia, left to boil, corrodes from the inside. That's the Machiavellian tactic. Don't strike immediately. Let fear rot the foundation before the sword is ever drawn. I've used this, and I've also failed by ignoring it. I remember once being pushed into a corner by someone who underestimated me. They baited me, tried to draw me into a fight I wasn't ready for. My ego screamed for revenge, but instead of lashing out, I pulled back, not because I was scared, but because I saw the bigger picture. And as I waited, their anxiety grew. They made mistakes, they overplayed their hand, and by the time I made my move, they were already broken. The win wasn't in the stride, it was in the waiting. You don't win because you fight harder. You win because the other side collapses before the battle even starts. And they collapse because they never learned to sit still. Because they thought control meant immediate action. But real control, real dominance, it's when you can sit with your power, untouched, while everyone else burns themselves out trying to guess what you'll do. You hold the frame, you own the tempo, and that stillness becomes the storm. I've seen leaders ruin alliances by acting too soon. I've watched relationships fall apart because someone couldn't hold their silence for 5 more minutes. Patience is pressure in disguise. It tests others, exposes their cracks, and reveals the truth that speed tries to bury. And the ones who master it, the ones who sit with fire in their chest and never flinch, those are the ones who move like gods when the time finally comes. So the next time you're tempted to react fast, remember this. The strongest move isn't always the first. It's the one that arrives after everything else has fallen. When the room is quiet, the noise has died, and your presence alone decides the outcome. That's patience. That's power. Some wars aren't won through conflict. They're won through absence, through silence, through distance so surgical it bleeds no noise but leaves devastation in its wake. You don't need to shout. You don't need to confront. And you don't need to destroy someone publicly. All you need is to subtract. Not their voice, not their image, just their support. The people who once stood behind them, the belief others once held in them. You turn the spotlight just slightly away, and suddenly, the figure in the center grows smaller. Not because they changed, but because the room did. Strategic distance is one of the most underestimated weapons in any arena, business, politics, relationships, even war. The Stoics would call it discipline. Machiavelli would call it mastery. I call it subtraction with purpose. When someone wrongs you, the reflex is retaliation. But what if you didn't fight back? What if you didn't argue, didn't confront, didn't explode? What if you just stepped away and took the crowd with you? Because when they speak and no one listens, when they act and no one follows, when they look around and realize the room is empty, that's the collapse. That's the moment they're no longer powerful, not because you tore them down, but because you allowed their illusion to fade without resistance. That kind of collapse is psychological. They start to question who they are without an audience, and when they no longer inspire loyalty, they panic. That panic is the echo of power lost in silence. I've seen it work in boardrooms where toxic leaders thrived on chaos and manipulation. The most effective revenge wasn't confrontation, it was coordinated withdrawal. One by one, the alliances crumbled, not with fireworks, with quiet, with strategic absences, delayed replies, missed invitations, and soon, they weren't leading anymore. They were just talking into empty space. I've watched people fall apart without a single enemy raising a hand, because the power was never in the attack. It was in the support they could no longer command. I've done it myself. There was someone in my life who drained everything around them: time, energy, attention, fueling off drama. I stopped engaging. I stopped defending. I simply pulled back. Others followed, and the person who once controlled every room now sits in silence. Not because I silenced them, but because I stopped providing an audience. You don't have to win battles with blood. You win them by removing the stage, by eroding foundations slowly, deliberately, until there's nothing left to stand on. And when the collapse comes, it won't be loud, it'll be hollow. A person standing alone, realizing the war ended long before they ever raised their sword. That's the power of subtraction. Quiet, untraceable, final. Closure isn't about winning. It's about ending something so completely that there's no air left for revival. No confusion, no illusion, no second round. True closure is not dramatic. It's decisive. It's when you walk away not in bitterness, not in rage, but in a silence so complete it echoes louder than any last word ever could. You don't slam the door. You close it with such finality that no one dares knock again. That's not retreat. That's not escape. That's domination in its purest form, because you didn't just leave. You ended it. Too many people believe victory means out-arguing, overpowering, or proving a point. But I've learned that the real power move is disappearance, not ghosting in petty silence, but removing your energy so thoroughly that your absence haunts what's left. When you don't explain, when you don't threaten, when you offer nothing but quiet resolve, you send a message louder than any confrontation. This is over. Not paused. Not hanging over. There's a kind of stillness that follows when someone finally realizes you're gone for good. It creeps in slowly, after the texts go unanswered. The bait gets ignored. The games no longer provoke a reaction. That's when they feel it. Not the sting of rejection, but the void of relevance. And in that void, they don't find closure, they find consequences. I once held on to something that should have ended long before it did. I kept arguing, kept explaining, kept reopening wounds, trying to make peace out of chaos. But chaos doesn't want peace, it feeds on continuation. And the day I chose silence, not to punish, but to preserve myself, everything changed. Not only did I reclaim my time, my mind, my power, but I left behind a version of me they could never reach again. That version didn't lose. That version evolved. Power doesn't announce, it ends things. That quote lives in me now. Real power doesn't seek applause. It doesn't post about its growth. It doesn't wait for validation. It just finishes what needs to be finished and walks away with zero residue. The cleanest cuts leave no scar, just space. Space where you used to be. And in that space, they either learn or they decay. Either way, it's no longer your concern. So let them wonder, let them guess, let them play chess with ghosts. You don't need to revisit the battlefield. You burned the map. Closure isn't revenge. It isn't silence. It's erasure. And once you understand that, you'll stop looking back, because when the chapter is closed properly, the story doesn't need a sequel. It needs silence, permanent, powerful silence. Stillness is not silence, it's strategy. Patience is not delay, it's precision. And clarity isn't found in chaos, it's born in control. If you've been watching closely, you've felt the shift, the pattern, the quiet thread woven through every lesson. We don't rise by screaming into the void, by fighting every battle, or by proving ourselves to every doubter. We rise by mastering the space between action and reaction. We rise by holding our power, not throwing it. Stillness is your shield, patience is your weapon, and psychological clarity, the kind that sees through noise, through masks, through fear, is your advantage. Because once you understand yourself, you can see everyone else clearly. And when you see clearly, you can end things cleanly, without noise, without conflict, without leaving wounds that never close. This is the way of silent mastery, where every move counts, where every withdrawal is intentional, where you don't chase closure, you create it. You don't seek revenge, you make them irrelevant. You don't need approval. You own your space so completely that others orbit it without ever touching your center. This isn't a life of apathy. It's a life of deep discipline. It's knowing when to wait and when to strike. It's realizing that not everything deserves a reaction. And not everyone deserves access to your energy. You don't win because you fight harder. You win because you know when not to fight. You let them exhaust themselves while you prepare, while you build, while you sharpen. I've lived the opposite. I've spoken too soon, reacted too fast, tried to control things by force. And all it did was scatter my focus and dilute my strength. But when I began choosing silence over drama, space over panic, control over chaos, I found something terrifyingly beautiful. Peace, not a passive kind, but a weaponized calm, the kind that shifts rooms, the kind that no one expects. And from that place, you move differently, you walk slower, you speak less, but every step lands with purpose. If this message resonates, comment "move in silence" below. Let this be the beginning of something deeper, something sharper. Subscribe for the next lesson, because the next move, it might be the one that changes everything. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You only need to move like the storm they never saw coming.